Hello, dear friends. Ken Graves here with GodSword. Thursday, September 19th, the year 2024. Our journey continues through the book of Amos, chapter 8. Amos, the 8th chapter. You will hear, probably during, if there's any pause, you'll hear the Calvary Chapel Bangor Praise Band. They're a great band of praisers. They're practicing out there in the on the stage in the auditorium, just outside my office. So, although they may be done, see, they do a good job, and it's a beautiful sound. The 8th chapter of Amos, verse 1. Thus, Lord Yahweh showed me, and behold, there was a basket of summer fruit. And he said, "What do you see, Amos?" And I said, "A basket of summer fruit." Then Yahweh said to me, "The end has come for my people Israel. I will pass over them no longer. And they will wail with the songs of the palace in that day, declares Lord Yahweh. Many will be the corpses in every place that will cast them forth in silence." He'll go on from there. Let's deal with this much of what God has showed the prophet Amos. A basket of summer fruit. A basket of summer fruit that is ripe. Today, we have a tradition. My family, my kids and grandkids, go together, and we go to the same apple orchard that I've been going to, eating apples from my whole life, in the town of Etna, the town of my nativity. Go to this apple orchard, and they have a big crop of Macintosh, and frankly, my very favorite apple. I love that apple. I'm salivating as I think of it. But many of you are not acquainted with Macintosh, because a particular apple, it doesn't keep. Like so many other apples, they can just coat it with wax, and it'll transport for days and days and be on a shelf for a period of time. But Macintosh, those beautiful red, when you take them off the tree is just so laden. Forgive me, I probably melodramatic, but I have a tendency to think of the tree of life and the fruit of that tree and what it would be like. When I see the Macintosh, when I see the branches laden, and these apples are so beautiful and red, and you take them off, and you shine them on your shirt and your sleeve, and they've got this almost burgundy color, and the speckles of orange. And the meat of the apple, when you bite in, it's just so white. Such a juicy apple. I love them fresh off the tree. But left, actually, just a week or so, not even a week, and they change. They become softer. The sugar breaks down. They're not as sweet as they are fresh off the tree. Hi. The cider. Oh. But anyway, I'm thinking about this with this chapter. A basket of summer fruit. And the implication is that it's ripe. It's a basket of summer fruit. It is ripe. It's at its peak. It's ripe. It's ready for, consumption. So also was Israel, was the northern kingdom, ready, ripe for judgment. There's a play on words that I can't pretend to really know about or really fully appreciate. But Amos's answer, a basket of summer fruits, the Hebrew expression would have sounded like the expression that God responded with. The end has come for my people, Israel. So it's not the end of the people, certainly not. This is the Old Testament period. There's a whole lot of history ahead yet for them. But it is the end of God's patience with them and his statement, the end has come. For my people Israel, I will pass over them no longer. So it's the end of God's patient waiting. And, God sends the prophets to warn, and he seeks to turn them, but they finally reach a point where judgment cannot be withheld any longer, like fruit that is at its prime ripeness. So they were ripe for judgment. And he continues. They will wail with the songs of the palace in that day. And many will be the corpses in every place. They will cast them forth in silence. Hear this, you who trample the needy, even to cause the humble of the land to cease, saying, when will the new moon pass over, so that we may sell grain on the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market, to make the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger, and to cheat with a deceptive balance, so as to buy the poor for money, and the needy for a pair of sandals, that we may sell the refuse of the wheat. So God has mentioned already here through the prophets and through the other prophets that among the things that grieves him and for which he will bring judgment, it is the exploitation of the poor. God said, you who trample the needy and cause the humble of the land to cease, oppressing and exploiting and cheating and getting rich doing it. They say, when will the new moon pass over, so that we may sell grain on the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market? So they're going through the motions and honoring God, supposedly honoring Yahweh, observing at least the new moons, the feast, but they're in a hurry for it. They're not focused on him, on God, on Yahweh, but instead complaining, when will it end, so that we may reopen the wheat market? To do what? You're in a hurry to get there, to cheat more, make the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger. Deceptive balances. God is watching. God is watching here in America as filthy rich corporate executives exploit the poor of our time, feeding them poisons, the buying of government agencies so that they can get away with it. But from the DEP to the CDC and the FDA, I know I mentioned the alphabet a lot, but the corruption that is compelled by greed, the compulsion to sell, the corruption to just to make more money, make food cheaper, and to make the population, particularly the poor, sicker. And then they can become dependent upon the other big pharmaceutical companies, other big corporations that sell drugs. God is watching. Verse 7, Yahweh has sworn by the lofty pride of Jacob. Indeed, I will never forget any of their works. And because of this, will not the land tremble, and everyone who inhabits it mourn? Indeed, all of it will rise up like the Nile, and it will be tossed about and subside like the Nile of Egypt. And it will be in that day, declares the Lord Yahweh, that I will make the sun go down at noon, and make the earth dark in broad daylight. So what is Amos talking about here? Well, there are some who maintain he's just simply describing a solar eclipse. And apparently, reversing the astronomical calendar back, it's apparent that there were a couple of major solar eclipses during Amos's lifetime in ministry. But I happen to believe that he's speaking of something greater and a darkness, just as God said through Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 28. You violate this covenant, God says, Deuteronomy 28:28, I will smite you with blindness. Blindness. I'm sorry, I will smite you with madness, blindness, and astonishment of heart. You will grope in the noonday as if it were nighttime. Deuteronomy 28:28. Madness, blindness. I think that's relevant. I think it's what we're talking about here. Or it may go beyond that. And Amos is prophesying some of the judgment of God that's going to happen during the Great Tribulation. But God says, it'll be in that day, declares your Lord Yahweh, that I will make the sun go down at noon and make the earth dark in broad daylight. So the earth dark in daylight. In verse 10, that I will overturn your feasts into mourning and all your songs into lamentation. And I will bring up sackcloth on everyone's loins and baldness on every head, and I will make it like a time of mourning for an only son. And the end of it will be like a bitter day. Now, this expression from the 10th verse, I'll make it like a time of mourning for an only son, does resemble the prophecy from Zechariah chapter 12 about the Lord's return at the end of the second coming of Christ, at the end of the tribulation. That he returns, he reveals himself to the covenant people, reveals himself to Israel. They ask him, where did you receive these wounds? And he tells them, it was in the house of my friends. They'll mourn for him. Same language as one mourns for his only son. So that lends to the interpretation of this prophecy being ultimately fulfilled at the second coming of Christ. Verse 11, behold, the days are coming, declares Lord Yahweh, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine for bread or a thirst for water, but rather for hearing the words of Yahweh. People will wander from sea to sea and from the north even to the east, and they will go to and fro and seek the word of Yahweh, but they will not find it. A famine from hearing. There have been a number of periods where, one could look at that particular period of time and conclude that that may well have been part of that. The 4 centuries between the completion of the Old Testament, the final Old Testament prophet, Malachi, and then the New Testament period. Those 4 centuries are certainly a period of time where God sent no prophet. It's a 400-year stretch that was only interrupted by God sending John the Baptist to break the silence. Perhaps it's a reference to that. But perhaps it's not as much a famine of the word of God being spoken, a famine of hearing. It's interesting. It doesn't mean that people aren't declaring the gospel, or that people aren't declaring the word of the Lord, people aren't speaking on behalf of God, but there's a famine of hearing. Now, God says he will send it. In verse 13, in that day, the beautiful virgins and the choice men will faint from thirst, that thirst for the word of God. As for those who swear by the guilt of Samaria, he's referring again now to the idolatrous temples, altars, and the religion of the northern kingdom from the time of Jeroboam on. Those who swear by the guilt of Samaria, who say, as your God lives, O Dan. And the God of Dan there's a great altar set up there and a calf to be worshipped. It's not God at all. Who say, as your God lives, O Dan, and as the way of Beersheba lives, they will fall and not rise again. So the idolatry of the covenant people invites the judgment that comes from Yahweh. Well, there's chapter 8. We'll continue, the Lord willing, tomorrow with chapter 9 of Amos, and we'll conclude our study of Amos before going into Obadiah next week. Appreciate you taking the time, all you guys. God bless you. And again, if you have a question or a comment you want to make, I'll do my best to answer. Ken Graves at ccbangor.org. I sure appreciate all of you. I don't need anything from you. I do very much appreciate your taking this journey with me. I certainly welcome your prayers. Grace and peace to you all.